Twelver Shi'ism is a rich and profound tradition, but no theology is immune from critical questions. One of the most significant is this: why does the Quran, the highest source of Islamic guidance, neither explicitly name the 12 Imams nor establish divine guidance as a formal, institutional framework through them? Various explanations have been offered by Twelver scholars over the centuries, but upon closer examination, many of these justifications reveal internal tensions or contradictions. In this video, we explore those tensions and propose a revised understanding of the doctrine that resolves or eliminates many of the underlying issues. Let's begin. If obedience to 12 divinely guided imams is truly an essential part of faith, then why wasn't this obligation explicitly mentioned in the Quran? Why were the names of the imams, or at the very least Ali ibn Abi Talib, not included in the text of Revelation? Number 1. Protection argument. One of the arguments presented has to do with the protection of the 12 imams' identities. The names of the imams were omitted from the Quran to protect them from tampering. If the names were mentioned, people could have changed or even eliminated them from the text. Moreover, people could name themselves or their children after the imams and claim leadership. This would make it difficult or even impossible to identify the true divine leader. Here is the problem with this argument. Shia traditions preserve narrations explicitly naming the 12 imams. If those narrations could be safeguarded, so could the Quran, which Allah explicitly promises to protect. More importantly, if Allah deliberately withheld the names for protection, why would the Prophet then publicly reveal them? This would defeat the very purpose of concealment. Thus, either Allah concealed the names for protection and His Prophet did the same, meaning the Prophet never foretold the names of the imams, or the Prophet foretold the names because there was no issue with regards to safeguarding them. And if safeguarding was a non-issue, then that cannot be the reason why the names are absent from the Quran. In conclusion, if the Prophet did publicly mention the names of the imams, then the protection argument collapses. And if the protection argument is valid, then the Prophet never mentioned the names, undermining the popular Twelver claim that the names of the imams, and hence the institution of Imamat, was foretold and explained by the Prophet. Number 2. Recognition by qualities. According to another argument, the 12 imams were meant to be recognized by their qualities described in the Quran, not by explicit names. Their conduct and character were so lofty and pure that only they could truly fit the descriptions of righteous individuals found in the Quran. In this way, it is claimed the Quran implicitly affirmed their identities while excluding everyone else who could not meet their level of piety and virtue. But this argument faces several problems. Firstly, recognition by qualities is inherently subjective. Multiple individuals may appear to fit certain descriptions, and people often disagree on who best embodies those traits. Even during the lifetimes of the imams, Muslims, including the Shia themselves, disagreed over who was most deserving of leadership among the descendants of Ali and Fatima. Second, many of the imams spent large parts of their lives in isolation, in prison, under surveillance, or otherwise. They had little to no exposure to the broader Muslim community. How could people be expected to recognize their qualities if they barely saw them or knew anything about them? Third, and most importantly, Twelver Shia theology holds that the imams were divinely appointed, each one designated by the previous as a divine guide. If explicit appointment determines legitimacy, then public recognition by personal assessment becomes not just irrelevant, it becomes invalid. Thus, either leadership depends on subjective personal recognition, which undermines the doctrine of divine appointment, or appointment alone determines legitimacy, which renders recognition by qualities unnecessary and invalid. To summarize, the method of identifying the imam is either his qualities or his appointment. Both cannot be true at the same time. Number 3, mercy and leeway. A third argument claims that Allah withheld the names of the 12 imams, or explicit mention of divine leadership after the Prophet, to offer people leeway, so that their rejection would not constitute direct and blatant defiance of the Quran, which could lead to greater punishment. In other words, this omission was a form of divine mercy extended to the Muslim community. But this rationale clashes with the Quran's own description of itself as a clear and manifest guide. If divine leadership after the Prophet were truly essential, we would expect the Quran to present this concept clearly and unambiguously, just as it does with other foundational beliefs, such as Tawheed, prophethood, and the afterlife. Moreover, Twelver theology holds that the Prophet's appointment of Ali at Ghadir Khum was manifest and binding. Those who rejected Ali's leadership are deemed sinful precisely because his designation was made clear by divine command. Thus, either the matter of leadership was deliberately left vague as a form of mercy, in which case the appointment of Ali and the other imams must also have been vague. That would naturally explain why Muslims disagreed about it. Or, leadership was clearly and publicly established, which renders the mercy argument invalid. In conclusion, the mercy explanation is inconsistent with both the Quran's model of manifest guidance and the Shia claim of clear prophetic designation. Number 4, test of obedience. A fourth argument claims that Allah deliberately left out explicit mention of Imamat after the Prophet as a test of obedience, to see who would follow the Prophet's guidance even when it wasn't explicitly stated in the Quranic text. Obedience to the Prophet, even without direct Quranic confirmation, is presented here as a divine trial for the believers. Here is the problem with this argument. Obedience to the Prophet is certainly a test, but primarily in matters of practice, what classical Twelver doctrine defines as furu al-din, or the branches of religion, such as prayer, fasting, and ritual acts. But when it comes to core beliefs, like belief in God, prophethood, and the afterlife, the Quran does not leave these ambiguous. It presents them clearly, repeatedly, and unambiguously. The Quran establishes the Prophet's role as the explainer of divine fundamentals, not their source. He clarifies revelation. He does not independently define foundational beliefs. However, classical Twelver theology classifies belief in the 12 Imams as part of usul al-din. If that belief is truly fundamental to salvation, then its absence from the Quran becomes difficult to explain. Thus, either Imama is a matter of practice, furu, in which case the test argument is valid, or Imama is a matter of doctrine, usul, in which case leaving it out of the Quran contradicts how the Quran communicates core guidance. Conclusion: the test of obedience argument only holds if leadership after the Prophet is reclassified as a secondary matter. But if it is truly a pillar of faith, as affirmed by the majority classical Twelver opinion, then the Quran's silence on it cannot be justified as a divine test. Number 5, al-Walaya in the eyes of the Imams. In light of the problems raised with the previous arguments, a more coherent understanding emerges based on a narration found in al-Kafi attributed to al-Imam as-Sadiq. According to this narration, when Abu Basir asked why Ali and his household were not explicitly named in the verse, "Obey Allah, obey the Messenger, and those in authority among you," the Imam replied with an analogy. Just as Allah revealed the obligation of prayer without specifying whether it consisted of 3 or 4 units, and left it to the Prophet to explain, so too were the details of a zakat, al-Hujjah, and al-Walaya clarified by the Prophet after revelation. The verse of obedience, he said, was revealed regarding Ali, al-Hassan, and al-Hussein, and the Prophet confirmed this by proclaiming, "Man kunt mawla fa'aliyun mawla." The narration continues with the Prophet's instruction to hold fast to the Quran and his Ahlul Bayt, affirming that they would never mislead the Ummah. He asked Allah not to separate them until they joined him at the pond, and stated that they were more knowledgeable than others and must not be taught, for they were the true inheritors of guidance. To prevent others from laying false claim to this status, the Prophet publicly identified them when the verse of purification was revealed. He gathered Ali, Fatma, al-Hassan, and al-Hussein under the cloak and declared them his true household, Ahlul Bayt. This narration clearly places al-Walaya in the same category as other religious practices. Obligations revealed in principle, but explained in detail by the Prophet. This framework resolves the earlier tensions. It explains why the Quran does not explicitly name the 12 Imams or formalize the institution of guidance after the Prophet, because specific details are rarely mentioned in the context of legal or ritual obligations. It avoids the contradictions seen in the protection, recognition, mercy, and test arguments. It reflects the Quran's own model. Core beliefs are stated clearly, while practical religious obligations are clarified by the Prophet. In this view, al-Walaya becomes the most important of practices because it governs how religious knowledge is preserved and applied, but it does remain part of Furu-ad-Din, not Usul-ad-Din. That is, if you go by this primitive method of dividing religion into belief and practices, which, by the way, we do not agree with, but that is a separate discussion. This understanding also explains why disagreement over guidance and leadership exists within the Ummah. Just as Muslims differ in how to pray or perform pilgrimage, they may also differ in identifying the most trustworthy sources of guidance. That is not blameworthy. It reflects the nature of a tradition that values reasoning, evidence, and prophetic clarification over textual absolutism. Here are our final reflections on this topic. Some Shia scholars, particularly at the higher levels of the seminaries in Najaf and Qum, have adopted a softer stance on al-Walaya. Rather than classifying it within Usul-ad-Din, they place it under Usul al-Madhab, the foundational principles of the Twelver school. However, this more flexible classification remains largely academic. In practice, the dominant belief among the Shia is that belief in the 12 Imams is essential for salvation, alongside Tawheed and prophethood. This presents a theological tension. If the identity of the Imams is truly part of Usul-ad-Din, then its absence from the Quran is difficult to reconcile with the Quran's model of manifest guidance. But if Walaya is reclassified as a religious practice, the most important of Furu-ad-Din, then the model becomes coherent and aligned with the Quranic structure, the history of the Imams themselves, and the teachings and conduct they embodied. Furthermore, it is important to recognize that specifying sources of guidance after the Prophet is not the exclusive domain of revelation. It falls within the domain of textual evidence, where interpretation, context, and judgment are involved. And this is a domain in which differences within the Ummah are expected. In this light, we affirm that our commitment to the 12 Imams is not based on blind sectarian assumption, but on what we believe to be strong and satisfactory evidence from the Quran, the prophetic tradition, as well as historical evidence. We hold that the Ahlul Bayt, especially Ali and his descendants, are the most authentic and trustworthy guides for preserving and transmitting the message of Islam. At the same time, we acknowledge that other Muslims, in their sincere and unbiased search for guidance, may arrive at different conclusions. We see no blame in this, as long as the search for truth is genuine and not biased due to sectarian or other factors. Just as scholars within the same school of thought may differ on matters of prayer or jurisprudence, so too can the broader Muslim community differ in identifying its sources of guidance. In the end, we strongly believe that Allah will not judge us by whether we arrived at absolute truth, but by whether we sought it sincerely, upheld the evidence available to us, and remained honest in our pursuit of divine guidance. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And those who strive in our cause, we will surely guide them to our paths, and indeed Allah is with the doers of good.